Hi physicists! Today this video is on calculating slope. I know this is a topic that a lot of my students struggle with, and so I've put together some steps to follow to try to make it a little easier on you guys. So here we go. Get out your notes and copy down what I have on the index cards. And then I'll go over an example after that you don't need to write down. All right, so in your notes, step one. Step one is to pick 2 points and label them. And how we pick 2 points is you put your finger on a point on the line, and the first thing that you're going to do is you trace your finger straight down to record the x value. So just to show you, if I find a point on the line, so like here's a place on the line, here's a place on the line, anywhere on the line, I just trace my finger down to read the x value. So that's your first step. Trace your finger down to read the x value. And then when we write this down, the x value is written first. So the thing that you read down is written first in the parentheses, and that's your x value. So if I were to record an x value, I would put it here in my parentheses. All right. Then the next thing that you have to do is you have to read the y value. So from the same point, and that's very important that you are staying on the same point, you trace your finger to the left to read the y value. So if I'm on the same point, I just want to trace my finger to the left until I get to the numbers, and then I can read what the y value is. So that's how you pick a point. Make sure that you're reading the x and the y value from the same point. And then how you write that down is in your parentheses, the second space is for the y value. So if I have my parentheses, I put the x value here, whatever I read from the bottom. And whenever I read from the left, I put here, that's my y value. So that's how you write down a point. So then you repeat. So for step one, you have to repeat this process just with a second point. So you want to pick 2 points, write them down in parentheses, and then you label them just like how I've done here. So if you notice my parentheses, the first spot I label x1, and then the second spot I label y1, and then I label this x2 and y2. So I picked 2 points, it doesn't matter which points. I read the x value and then the y value of the first point, and then I labeled it x1 and y1. I read the x value and the y value of the second point, and I labeled it x2 and y2. So make sure you have that in your notes. That's step one. And I will be going through an example when I'm done with the notes. I just want you to have notes down so you can kind of follow along with them. All right. So step one, pick 2 points and label them. Step two, we calculate the rise. Now the rise is how far you go up on the graph. That's your change in y. How far you go up on the graph is your change in y. And mathematically, all you do is you take your second y point minus your first y point between your 2 points. And so these are just from what you labeled in step one. So whatever you labeled as y2 minus whatever you labeled as y1. And it doesn't matter what points you picked for y2 or y1. It's just whatever you labeled them as. It's just more of an accounting thing. Now, one thing that I want to note is that sometimes you're going to get negative numbers. And so the best way to deal with negative numbers is to use a number line. So I've drawn a nice little number line. It goes 0 in the middle, positive numbers on the right, negative numbers on the left. If you have a plus, if you're doing addition, it moves your number to the right. So like, let's say 1 plus 1, I would move 1 to the right to get 2. Now, if you have, make sure you write this down, if you have a minus sign, it moves the number to the left. So take a look at this. So if I have 1 minus 1, I move 1 space to the left. That gets me 0. You probably already know what 1 minus 1 is, but it gets a little bit more complicated when you have like a bunch of negatives in there. All right, then the last thing to remember is that 2 minuses turn into a plus. So if you have minus minus, 2 minuses in a row, that actually turns into a plus, and then you follow your same rules for plus. So I even like to make the step of writing down the same thing again with the plus in the middle, so I know what I'm doing. All right, so that's step 2, calculating the rise, y2 minus y1. All right, step 3 is calculate the run. The run is how far over it goes. So that's the difference in the x's. So x2 minus x1. And again, this is from what you labeled in step 1. You just have to be consistent. It doesn't matter what points you pick. You just have to be using the same points and labeling them. And then it's all about keeping track of things. So you just take x2 minus x1. So just a note, you might have to do the same thing with the negative numbers again. And you don't have to rewrite that. Just know that you might get some negative numbers in there and to use a number line. All right, the last step is to divide the rise by the run, and that is equal to the slope. So I'm going to do an example on this. Now, I know it might have sounded like a lot going on, but if you really just break it down and follow each step is smaller things to do. And you will never have to memorize these steps. You will always be able to use your notes on tests. You'll always be able to use the anchor chart in the classroom. Just break it down step by step, and it makes something that's hard a little bit easier, hopefully. All right, so I've kind of set up in your notebook, you kind of have this set up. For step 1, pick 2 points and label them. So you've got 2 places to write points. Step 2, y2 minus y1. Step 3, x2 minus x1. And step 4, rise divided by 1. So let's start with pick 2 points and label them. I'm gonna pick the first point to be this one. So what I'm gonna do is I put my finger on it, and I'm gonna go down to read the x value. So sometimes it's nice even to like make an x on the point that I'm reading so that I remember what point I'm reading, because I have to use the same point for y. So I go down to read the x value, and that looks like it's -2. So the first thing I write is negative, wow, I can't write very well, -2, right there. That's my first x place. All right, now I go back to that same point, and now I go to the left, and it looks like that's a +2 to the left. So my y value is a +2. I'm sure having a hard time writing on this board, so excuse my poor handwriting. All right, so there's a -2 and a +2. That's my first point. Now, the next thing, I'm gonna pick another point. Technically doesn't matter which point you pick, but one thing that kind of helps make your math easier is to pick a point to the right of your first point. So over to the right of your first point. So I'm gonna pick this one over here. So I'm gonna mark it again because that's helpful to remember what point I picked. Now I go down and I read the number on the x, that's a 4. So my x value for that point is a 4. Now I'm gonna go over and read the number to the left. So from the point, just trace my finger over, straight left, and it's a -1. So -1. And there you go. So you've got my 2 points. Now labeling them, you're always gonna label them the same way. x1, y1, always the same. x2, y2. And so what that means is my x1 is -2, my y1 is 2. My x2 is +4, my y2 is -1. So I've labeled them. It doesn't matter which points you pick, as long as you're keeping them consistent. And that labeling them helps you be consistent. All right, so for my next step, calculating the rise, I've got y2 minus y1. So I just look at my 2 points that I've labeled. See, labeling it makes it really easy. So y2 is -1, -1. Got it from y2. Minus y1. y1 is 2. See, I labeled it. That's how I know. y1 is 2. Okay, so it looks like I've got a -1 minus 2. So if I go down to my number line, I start with -1, and then I need to go -2, so that's 2 to the left. So -1, boop, boop. Looks like I'm at -3. So -3. All right, I found my rise. Yay! Now for my run. So my run is calculated similarly. x2 minus x1. So I look at my x2. What's my x2? I've labeled it. My x2 is 4. So 4 minus, okay, x1 is -2. See, I labeled it. 4 minus -2. Okay, so here's a rule that I wrote in my notes. So I've got a minus, minus. See how there's 2 minuses in a row? Has to be in a row. So up here I had a minus and then the number and then a minus. That doesn't work. That just is straight up minusing. This is 2 minuses in a row. And those actually become a plus. So on my number line, I go 4 plus 2 moves me 2 that way. 4 plus 2 is 6. I know most of you could have done that in your head, but it's really nice to see on the number line so that you can do it when it's more complicated than that, hopefully. All right, so I know this is a big process, but if you break it down step by step, just look at each little step individually, I know you can do it. All right, last step, rise divided by run. So I take my rise, which is step 2, which is -3, and I divide it by my run, which is 6. Now at this point, you could just honestly use a calculator, type in -3 divided by 6. You could even not type in the negative at first. You go 3 divided by 6, and then just know that you have to make your answer negative in the end. All right, so 3 divided by 6 is -0.5. So that's my slope. Now I just want to reiterate some things. If you're finding this really hard, what you need to do is break it down step by step. So sort of do it with me. Watch the video for step 1, and then you try step 1. Then watch the video for step 2, and then you try step 2. I know it can look a little overwhelming, but if you do step by step, I know you can get it. Good job, physicists, and good luck.